Resume our recording. So once again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our very first 2022 webinar for the ATD Central Florida chapter. I am very excited that we've got Kimberly Cofrancesco and Brian Lanza here, and they're going to be sharing 7 fundamentals of designing e-learning that will help you capture your learners' attention, and they'll be able to apply what they're learning in the workplace, which is always our goal for learners to exhibit those behaviors. But first, I've got just a few announcements for you. So sorry, we got ahead of ourselves there. So the first one is wanted to say thanks. Last year was a challenging year, but a lot of you stuck with us, and I see some new faces. So welcome to those new members. One thing that you guys know is that we love our members, and we love our volunteers as well. We've got quite a few volunteers on here on the call who have either been volunteering for quite a while or brand new. And we appreciate all of you for the support that you give our chapter. If you are currently only a local member or only a national member, we encourage you to look into the benefits of being both a local and a national member, and then you would be what we call a power member, which means that you get to get the benefits of both what the local chapter offers and what ATD National offers. So best of both worlds. And then we want you to meet the board. So some of us are on the call today. Thank you, board, for always supporting everything that we do. And if you'll notice, there's a few open spots. So that means we're looking for more volunteers. And so if you would like to lend a hand, learn some new skills, go to our website. There's a form there you can fill out and let us know what your interests are. We have plenty of opportunities for someone to lend a hand. You don't necessarily have to sit on a board seat in order to share your skills with us or learn something. And then our theme for this year is caring and capabilities. We thought after 2021 and 2020, this year as training professionals, learning professionals, we need to show more empathy in the workplace. People are going through a lot. Our learning experiences have to help staff and organizations know that we care about them. And capabilities, of course, increasing our capabilities as learning professionals.
Yeah, I have something.
Someone who's talking.
Okay, sorry.
Mute yourself. Thank you. And so as learning professionals, we need to continue to sharpen our saws, going back a little bit to Franklin Covey, and increase those skills, technology advancements, and just being aware of what's going on in the world and how it's affecting our roles. And then we've got a few new things coming for ATD Central Florida. We hope to have a few SIGs that open up next quarter. Check out our blog and look out for vendor spotlights that we've got lined up for this year. And so without further ado, ATD ICE. And actually, Brian and Kimberly will be speaking at ATD ICE. So we will get to see them in Orlando when they come down. And now, without further ado, I do bring you Brian and Kimberly, the stars of our show today. So Kimberly is she calls herself a passionate speaker and self-proclaimed learning geek. So Kimberly, I think you and I can probably be sisters from different misters.
There you go. That's perfect.
Yeah, and then we have Brian, who Brian has also served as chapter leader for his local chapter, and he is very active in the learning community as well. They are both lifelong learners and obviously have a passion for giving back to the learning community. They have both won awards from the Learning Guild for the best process in a solution for e-learning. And today they are going to share, as I said, 7 fundamentals that we should apply when creating e-learning. So Brian, Kimberly, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosa. And thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Rosa.
Brian and I are so happy to have you all here today because we've actually been trying to get a hold of you all about your car's extended warranty. So this is perfect. We'll get to talk to you about that today. Just kidding. I'm Kimberly Cofrancesco. I, as Rosa mentioned, I'm definitely a lifelong learner. I have a huge passion. Whenever I think about my hobbies, it's sometimes depressing, but I don't really have a lot of hobbies other than learning and development. It seems like I tend to always gravitate towards those areas. So, but that's me. That's who I am. I've been in the instructional design world now for about 15 years, and I'm currently the director of learning solutions and delivery for Grant Thornton, which is a big public accounting firm. And so very excited to be here today, as I mentioned. And Brian, I'll let you do your introduction if you'd like, and then I'll talk a little bit about kind of how we met and the basis for today's session.
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. Again, my name is Brian Lanza, and I'm an instructional designer. And I've been in the industry about a little over 10 years myself. I worked across various industries. I worked in telecommunications, hotel and hospitality. I've worked in business and finance, and most recently working in the government sector, designing trainings, e-learning, specifically virtual training and instructor-led trainings. I'm like Kimberly, I'm I guess a learning geek. I love just talking about this stuff and just being around it and constantly learning new things. As Rosa mentioned, I did serve along with Kimberly at our local ATD chapter here in the Raleigh-Durham area, and enjoyed that experience. And I enjoy giving back to the community. So, I do things like speaking engagements. I do a little writing as well about instructional design, e-learning design, and personally, I'm a big sports guy. I love sports, and you'll see me referencing teams and teamwork a lot, usually in my trainings from that background. And I spend a lot of time with my family. I'm married. I have two kids and a little Boston Terrier that we just added to the family recently. So that's me in a nutshell. And again, thanks for joining us. We're happy to be here presenting to you all today in Central Florida.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, Brian has a whole lot more hobbies than I do. And let's not forget CrossFit too, right, Brian?
CrossFit as well, yes.
That's right. So the basis of our presentation today, as we mentioned, it's the 7 fundamentals of our effective e-learning. It's based on a course that Brian and I developed, the course that Rosa had mentioned. We won a best business process solution at eLearning Guild's DevLearn conference. It's been a few years now, but the basis for the course, kind of where it started, just to give you a little bit of background, I started working with Brian at a new company, and on day one, we were tasked with, or my day one, Brian, you hadn't been there that long either, I think at that point, right?
Yeah, maybe a couple of months.
Okay,
Yep.
So we were tasked with pulling together and creating an engaging e-learning course that's for accounting professionals and that is also a compliance course, right? So we're like, okay, so it's for accountants, it's a compliance course, and it needs to be engaging. Oh, and by the way, we needed to have pretty much a good draft of our storyboard by the end of that first week. So we were a little terrified, but we sat down and we pulled out the old, if you guys remember, if you don't, I would encourage you to go check it out, but it's the eLearning Manifesto. Does anybody remember? And you can do a virtual raise of your hands. But the eLearning Manifesto.
Nodding her head, Kimberly.
Okay, yeah. So we basically took it, printed it down, and we set up, kind of looking at what our manager was asking us to do. We took a look at we had like the content itself, and we just went through the e-learning manifesto and, kind of pulled in those elements, as many of those elements as we can. So we pulled it all together, and that is the basis of our presentation today, because we're going to kind of walk through that particular course as an example, but then, expand on that. So as we mentioned, the purpose of this session is e-learning, and e-learning as a asynchronous event. So I just want to mention that, because we can have a whole other conversation about virtual live delivery, which I think we all have a passion for as well, especially now in the current environment with our virtual learning need. But for today's session, we're going to focus on the traditional asynchronous e-learning. So with that, Brian, tell us, how do you think e-learning can be fun?
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. Some of you may have noticed that in our title, the word fun and fundamentals was underlined or highlighted, and that was done on purpose. The reason being is that Kimberly and I both believe very deeply that e-learning should be fun, that the whole experience from the beginning to the eventual, distribution to your audience should be a fun experience. For me, it's when you're doing that ideation of what are we going to create here? What ideas can we put together to, present this information in a creative way, in an interesting way. To me, that's fun. And then when you get down and you start actually designing your course, if it be a storyboard or you're writing out the content, some of us might create like a design template. What colors are we going to use? What fonts are we going to use? What kind of imagery? Is it going to be animations involved at all, or audio? If so, what does that look like? That's fun. You're almost like, creating like I kind of, make an analogy to like someone creating a movie or a TV show. You're putting all the pieces together, right? Then when you get to development, I think for Kimberly and I, both of us, this is kind of the most fun, because then you're actually taking your ideas and you're putting them into play, right? You're actually designing your course. And that's something that's cool, because it comes to life for me. What was once something on a whiteboard or some stickies, scattered across your desk, now it's an actual thing that you can interact with, touch, view on different devices. To me, that's kind of a cool thing. And then lastly, we want, and we hope that you would want, that the learning should be somewhat fun for your audience, right? Something that they enjoy taking, something that's interesting, something that's actually going to resonate with them after the experience, and say, hey, you know what, that was actually pretty neat, and I learned a few things along the way. Now we do realize, we work in corporate, a lot of us, or government, and sometimes we're bound by, or most times we're bound by financial budgets or timeline constraints, etc. So it can't be all fun all the time, right? And we're realistic about that. But what we strive for is, if you can incorporate some of those elements, we think it's going to go a long way really to making your e-learning much more impactful, much more effective, and overall a better experience. So having said that, let's kind of get into it here, and let's kick off with our first fundamental.
Okay, and Brian, there is one question that's been posed, which is, how did your time in hospitality get you, how was that used getting you into training and development?
Yeah, great question. Looks like Michael sent that. I have always kind of had a retail job. I started out very young. My parents were like, okay, you're a teenager, get to work. So I went into retail, which was, the jobs that hire teenagers. And I enjoyed it. I like the social interaction with people. I love just the environment. I worked in various different industries, but then I kind of, as I got older, I kind of progressed into the restaurant industry, and I worked in various roles in the restaurant industry. I was sort of like, I was server, host, maitre d', and kind of got to learn it from a higher level in various ways. And the first job I ever got out of graduate school was for a company creating a customer service training for a restaurant. So I was like, hey, I think I could be a great person for this, because I have a lot of expertise in this subject matter. And, as IDs, we always don't need to know the material so well, but I find that if you do have some background and it helps, I think you can be a much more valuable asset to that particular organization.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always tricky, right, with having that level of expertise, because a lot of times in our roles we are dependent upon the SMEs. to really help us with that. So when you have that additional background, it's such a huge benefit to have that. All right, so our first fundamental, does e-learning make sense? So just like you see here on the screen, you know, you always want to make sure before you get into designing and developing an e-learning course, you need to make sure, you know, does e-learning even make sense? So we're going to talk about that first. As we can see here, putting a red triangle in a round hole is not going to work. So let's go ahead and we could move forward, Brian, to the next slide, please. All right, so I don't know about you, but I would not feel comfortable, right? If I was, you know, having a lot of pain and I find out I need to have surgery, and I see this surgeon here, not sure how to replace a hip. He learned about it in an e-learning course, and of course now he can't remember. So this is obviously an extreme, but just to drive home the point that, you know, sometimes you want to make sure, right? If you need like that hands-on type of training, in a case of like you know, obviously this is an extreme case with a surgeon, but e-learning is not a good choice, right? When you need to have some sort of physical skill that requires some sort of practice, definitely not a good choice for e-learning. Another consideration, Brian, if we could go to the next slide, is who is your audience, right? Are they local? Are they global? In the current environment we're in, obviously there's a lot of need now to reach a dispersed audience. I know a lot of companies have gone to fully remote and have actually, you know, have that on their plan to continue from a full-time basis. But think about, you know, that who's your audience? Are they local? Are they global? Is it, you know, a group of thousands? Is it a group of just a couple? If you're talking about 8 individuals in one office, for example, that need to complete a training, it's probably not going to be an effective use of your time or budget to create an e-learning course. So in that case, you'd probably go with your face-to-face, if you know, outside of the COVID environment, or some sort of like live virtual type of training. So I'm curious to see and would love to get your engagement. As we mentioned, I think at the beginning of the session, we definitely want to have as much engagement as we can during our time together today. So curious if anybody's ever had a stakeholder approach them and, you know, say, hey, I need an e-learning module, right? And I think we could all relate to the fact that sometimes we feel like order takers in our roles, and that we've probably all had something like that happen. So curious if anybody has had, or you could do a virtual raise hand or drop it in chat, but who's ever had that, right? I think we all have had a stakeholder come to us and say they need an e-learning module. And you start to do your analysis and you find out, okay, the audience is for 10 people. It's a webcast that can be just rebroadcast if we want to, you know, and so you kind of have those kinds of conversations, you know, right up front, rather than always looking at an option to kind of move into the e-learning space. So I'm just going to check to see if we had any comments in there.
Have been a couple, Kim.
Yeah,
Yeah,
lots of requests for e-learning and self-paced courses. Yeah, so Michael, and that's a good point, right? Because I think, you know, it's up to us, right, to educate our stakeholders and our clients on the different types of opportunities that we have now for learning, right? Sometimes they might think that e-learning is the only option, or they might think that a webcast is the only option. So it's there where we get to pull out our consultative skills to say, hey, I understand, you know, that you feel like this is something that should be delivered asynchronously, but let's talk about the shelf life, right? Is this course something that's going to be still a stable course in a year from now or 2 years from now? And, you know, you start having some of those conversations and realize that there may be, sometimes there's not even a training need after all. I think we could all relate to that too. You find out that it's not that somebody's processing an order incorrectly, it's that they are not hitting the enter button at the end. And really all that is a sticky note to say, hit the enter button and you'll be good. So that's a great point. And then in Elizabeth, yes, you know, again, these larger audiences, especially if they're a worldwide audience for sure. And if you're also working with different time zones.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, Brian, we can go to the next slide. So when does e-learning make sense? So we kind of touched on that a little bit already. I think, as I mentioned, if you have a remote or a widely dispersed audience, for sure, from a cost savings perspective, if it was something that you would have been bringing people together, traveling in, obviously that's going to make sense there. If you are, and again, let's pretend we're not in the COVID environment, but if you're typically bringing everybody together for like a 3 or a 4-day learning event and you're traveling everybody in and taking a look at some of that content to say, can some of this be covered as part of a self-study, pre-work essentially before actually sending them out there, because you're still going to have cost savings on the hotel costs, the food costs, and that sort of thing. Obviously, in our current environment, it may not be possible for groups to get together in person anyways, but I think we've all had an opportunity to get really creative in the last couple of years to try to explore, how we can maximize the feeling of a face-to-face learning experience, doing some cohort groups and study groups and that sort of thing. And like I said, for today's session, we're going to focus just strictly on the asynchronous, but you can use some of that as part of your overall bigger program. So you might have a complete virtual program and you might have some cohort group activities, embedded in there, and you might have some e-learning components as well. So curious if there's any other ideas out there of scenarios that maybe I didn't mention or that we haven't talked about yet where they would be good candidates for e-learning.
And feel free, folks, to drop anything into the chat, or you can come off mute. We're totally open with either option.
All right, looks like we probably hit them all then. All right, Bri,
All right.
take it away.
All right, thank you, Kim. All right, so fundamental number 2 is attention, please. So what do I mean by this? I always tell this story because it was very impactful in my life. Years ago, I worked for a company, and to this company's credit, they put a lot of effort and time and resources into development. They were kind of that rare egg out there that said, hey, we understand the value of training, and we're going to really, invest the time and resources to train our employees really well. So what they gave all of us, or my new hire group, was a 3-week new hire orientation. And it was a blended learning experience. It was primarily instructor-led classroom. There was some e-learning parts to it as well. But one technique that one of the trainers used there that really just kind of leaped off, the page to me, if you will, was that before she started any one of her sessions, she would have us do something. It could be as simple as, okay, stand up from your desk and stretch, or, and everyone, let's clap together in unison, or do some jumping jacks, or even like touch our toes, something simple just to get us to become aware and alert. And her reason was, as I learned afterwards, was to get us to pay attention. She wanted us to make sure that we were listening to her, that we were all awake, alert, and that we were going to, pay attention to what she was going to say, because what she had to say is very important. So that's something that we need to do and strive to do when we're creating e-learning. So, our modern adult learner, kind of a funny picture here, but, I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this. Adult learners, especially in today's day and age, we have very busy schedules, right? We're often juggling multiple responsibilities throughout our days. We're answering emails, we're answering IMs, we're answering phone calls. We got multiple meetings. Sometimes we're double booked, which I never quite understood how you go to 2 meetings at once. Maybe someone can explain that to me. But, these are some of the realities that we face in corporate America, and even in the government and other sectors as well. So, and often, and I'm sure you all have experienced this, I know I have, I've been told by my trainer, by my manager, excuse me, hey, here's a training for you to complete. Complete it by Y date. Take training X, complete it by Y date, and that's it, right? There's no additional time to do it. Not we're going to give you an afternoon off or give you some time to take this training. It's just get it done and move on, and that's it, right? That's the order. So, we need to keep that in mind when we're designing learning, that we need to really capture learners' attention. And that's why it's really important to do so, when you first create your training. So Dr. Michael Allen is someone who Kimberly and I are both a big fan of. I got to thank Kimberly. She introduced me to Dr. Allen, and he speaks very highly about motivation in e-learning. So why? I wondered why. Why is he so keen on pushing motivation in e-learning? Well, there are several things that he talks about, and I pulled out a few of those ideas here from his book, Michael Allen's Guide to E-Learning, that I think are just worthy to stop and take note of. He says emotional arousal helps the brain learn, right? He's thinking about brain-based learning, how we learn as human beings. He says if there's no motivation, there are no learning outcomes, which is a pretty strong statement. And lastly, this one really jumped off the page to me. If you only have enough money to either teach or motivate, this would be your audience. Don't bother with teaching, spend it all on motivation. And that just really, to me is such a powerful statement, because he's saying that if you don't have motivation, if they're not motivated to learn, they're not going to. So he, makes it a point in his e-learning design to incorporate motivation at all parts of the process. And it's something that Kimberly and I strive to do as well. And we use it a lot in our compliance course, which we're going to talk about a little bit as we get into today's discussion.
Brian, we have a question that I think kind of applies to that part that you just mentioned,
sure.
Of getting their attention. And so Michael wants to know, when you're, in your e-learning, what's the normal retention time for someone's attention, to keep that focus? Do you have anything from study?
Nothing offhand, Michael. Good question though, thank you. I mean, there's studies out there that, the attention span is like a few seconds, at least to get their initial attention. What I would say is throughout an e-learning, you're striving to constantly regain their attention, right? So put something up front that captures their attention, give them some information, get another hook to pull them back in, right? And we're going to discuss several techniques that we use. So great question, Michael. I'm glad you're thinking that. In today's training, Kimberly has her next topic is going to focus on that a lot, where what can we do to really, I call it pulling them into the learning, right? Making them part of it so they're actively engaged throughout the whole experience. But to answer your question, you really should be striving to do that throughout the entire e-learning module.
Yep.
Great question. Anything to that, Kimberly?
Just like you said, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but I agree, just, keeping that throughout. We don't want to let our guard down.
That's right. I don't want to give away too much too soon, but hang in there. There's a type of motivation for you right there. Okay, so Malcolm Knowles. For those of you who have studied instructional design, either in higher ed or through your own personal studies and readings, you probably know about his theory of Andragogy. I won't spend too much time going over what his theory is about, but there are a few things that he talks about that are assumptions of adult learners that I think are pertinent to this topic. One is as a person matures, his or her readiness to learn becomes oriented increasingly to developmental tasks of his or her social roles. So think of things like work, personal things. That's what kind of drives them and motivates them. Also, as a person matures, their perspective changes from one of postponed application of knowledge to immediacy of application. So as a result, the orientation shifts from one of subject-centeredness to one of problem-centeredness. So this is where andragogy differs greatly from pedagogy, which is how we train or how we instruct, K through 12 or younger individuals, right, children. So in adult learning, the focus should be on solving problems, right? Addressing things that are of a high need, right? It's not learn this today and we're going to give you a test on it next Friday, right? That's the difference between the two theories, and how when you're designing training, you want to keep that problem-centeredness, that learner focus as a key point in your design. And then he also mentions as a person matures, the motivation to learn is internal. So you want to tap into what is driving them. That's kind of what I'm trying to express here in this section. And then he also adds this one principle of adult learning. Adults are most interested in learning that has immediate relevance and impact to their job or personal life, right? What are the kind of the two primary things in our lives? Usually when we meet somebody for the first time, it's, oh, tell me about your job and tell me about your family, right? Because why? Because that takes up the majority of our time as adults, right? Hobbies are in there as well, but you're spending 40 plus hours, sometimes more at your job, and then every off hours with your personal life. So things that are relevant and are important to those two things are going to be relevant and important to your audience. So how do we do that, right? This is something that you can add to your toolbox, after today's session, right? A book that I love, and I mentioned it a lot, so I should probably get some kind of financial feedback for this or payback, but Cami Bean's book, The Accidental Instructional Designer, I love. I see Rosa nodding her head. I love Cami's writing style. I think it's very down to earth, easy to read. It's funny. I think she just nails it when it comes to adult learning and writing for the adult learner. She talks about this one model in her book, and it's called the AIDA model. And yes, I can repeat that, Janet. It's Cami Bean, the Accidental Instructional Designer. And maybe we can throw that in the chat as well. But that's a great resource that I highly recommend. And she talks about this AIDA model. And AIDA is an acronym. And what it stands for is, first, you got to get their attention, right? The A is for attention. Find the hook that taps into what's motivating that audience, right? Identify what stakes are at play and give them a reason to care, right? And she talks about that sometimes as instructional designers, we need to think like marketing or salespeople, right? What good is all that great content that you created if they're not going to actually sit down and spend the time doing it, right? You need to kind of hook them in. So the I stands for capture their interests, right? So you got their attention, now capture their interests. Focus on, or better yet, tell them what are the benefits and advantages of your training, right? Present the WIFM here. Now the WIFM is something that they use in the sales world. Some of you might have heard it. It stands for what's in it for me. So another acronym. And that really is, something that I'm always constantly thinking about when I design, so that when I'm creating an instruction, I'm always thinking, what benefit, is it going to satisfy for that learner? And if you can make an emotional connection by doing that, that's even better. And Kimberly's going to chat about that in a little bit here. D is to incite a desire to learn a new thing or change a behavior. And this is where that WIFM kind of gets expanded on. So will the training help me to increase my sales? Will it help me to reduce errors that I do on the job? Is it going to help me earn more money? Who's not motivated by money? Is it going to make them eligible for a promotion, right? What are those things that are what's going to incite that desire for me? And then the last thing is to take action. And that's something that we're going to chat about in a little bit. Okay, so what can we do as instructional designers? I pulled together some simple examples. I didn't want to get too complex. We're not going into high audio visual. We're not dealing with 3D models. Simple things that we can do. We can put the WIFM directly on the welcome slide. You can create a course that just says, boom, something like this, right? We're putting in why it's important, what it's going to do for you, and how are we going to answer those? How is this content going to satisfy those desires of yours? Another option, and I kind of pulled it from our own course, is the 7 fundamentals of effective e-learning. We had our marketing hats on when we created that title, right? We wanted to tell you in a few words why you should be here today, right? 1, you're going to learn fundamentals, key things that you need to know to design e-learning, but more appropriately, effective e-learning, right? E-learning that's going to be effective, impactful, sticky, leave a good impression. And, we added the number 7. So, before you even, logged into the Zoom call today, that you're walking away with 7 new tools, hopefully, that will help you in your job. So even small things like that go a long way. And the other thing is like just use a stock image, a powerful stock image, impactful title slide that tells a story. So this is a course that I worked on, a little while ago. It's been a few years, but I want to just reach out to the audience here, and ask you for your feedback. You can put in the chat, or you can, come off mute, whatever you prefer. But looking at this title slide here, what do you think this course is about? What are some of the things that, the learner is going to be doing? Who are they working with? Provide some feedback and see if you can tell that story, or if you can discover the story that I was trying to tell with this picture. Team working together. Yep. Great. Thank you, Jeff. Absolutely.
Brainstorming.
Brainstorming. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Team reviewing each other's work and offering feedback. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Yeah, how about the players involved? Effective meetings. Thank you, Wayetta. Apologize if I mispronounce your name, but effective meetings, yeah. There's one thing, look at who's involved, and I know that my wording is covering a little bit, but who's involved in the training? Who's leading the training here? I don't know if we can tell from the picture, but the feedback is very good and it's on point. Peer review is a business and finance service where a senior level manager or director is actually mentoring or guiding a younger audience. And he or she is reviewing material, right? Brainstorming, right? In meetings, right? And they're providing a service to the industry, right? In this case, it's auditing information and auditing reports that other accountants have prepared. So just as you have all discovered here, this image kind of told that story without even them kind of walking in. And that's something that you can really do real simple to start your course, to kind of just build some motivation and some interest. So thank you for your feedback. And then real quickly, I'll touch on some other best practices. You can present a startling fact or statistic, to kind of get their attention at the beginning of your course. You can introduce a scenario and have the learner answer some difficult questions. And this is when you confront them with what they are already missing. So what do they don't know? What do they not know? Sometimes when you confront them with that up front, it builds interest and intrigue as to, okay, I need to understand this material. Obviously, I don't know it. Let me pay attention here. And you can also introduce a character and have them do something intriguing, like help solve a workplace dilemma. And you're probably kind of figuring out from these bullet points here that we're getting into a type of way of presenting our information. And I'll throw it back over to Kimberly for our next fundamental.
Awesome, thank you. And you could hit the forward button for the first one. So it is, I would say, here's a story is probably my favorite section. So if we were to pick favorites of our fundamentals, my favorite fundamental would be around storytelling. But so when I say storytelling, what do we mean by storytelling in e-learning? What's so great about stories? And at the end of the day, it kind of goes back again to capturing the learner's attention, getting them interested and engaged in the content. Quick question about emotion. So virtual show of hands, who's planning to watch the Super Bowl this year? Whether you're for the teams or not for the teams, right? I think a lot of us probably are. Curious to see what your thoughts are on, are you big on the commercials? Is that like your big thing? I enjoy watching the commercials, right? I think a lot of us do. I think that Commercials are always going to engage us, and they pull at our emotions. I always remember for the longest time, Budweiser, some of their commercials were just like, whew. But I'm curious to see, I remember the Super Bowl in 2020. So this was just before COVID. It was actually the last time Brian and I had presented in a live local environment. And I always remembered there was the commercial for Google, and it was the gentleman who was Googling about his late wife, Loretta, how not to forget, how to remember his late wife, Loretta. And I remember that was like just such an emotional commercial. I think it pulled it. If anybody recalls watching it, if you remember it, and if you don't, you could Google it and see, but it's like one of those things that it just kind of pulls at your emotions, right? You see yourself in it. You see, oh, Elizabeth remembers it. Yep. You see your parents in it, you see your grandparents in it. And, here we are 2 years later, and I still remember it pretty vividly. And that's because of the power of emotions. And when we think about how we can play on our emotions in an e-learning course, it's really similar to the marketing techniques that they use for commercials. So storytelling in e-learning really has the power to motivate, engage, and really spark some of those behavioral changes. And, along with that, performance improvements and that sort of thing. So there is a science behind storytelling and emotions. I'm going to tell it very quickly, but there was a gentleman by the name of Paul Zak who conducted a research experiment some years back where he paid some volunteers to watch a movie. And what he did was he collected their blood samples before and after the movie. And the movie was about a little boy that was very sick with cancer, and he didn't know how sick he was, but of course his family did, his dad did, and they were having a really hard time with it. But eventually the dad was able to kind of accept the fact and really be genuinely happy for the sake of his son, and no matter how long the son had left. So they played this movie for them, and then they collected their blood samples again. So they took it before and after. And what they found was that two chemicals were produced, cortisol and oxytocin, and they're both related. Basically, they're related to empathy and focusing attention. So there is a scientific fact behind the empathy and the attention that goes along with when your emotions are evoked. And I think we could all relate to. We all know where we were at various times in our life. I think we can all relate to what we were doing, who we were with when, we were on September 11, 2001. So in this study, the interesting thing was, this is kind of a bonus that I was surprised about, was that the participants were given the opportunity after to donate the money to seriously ill children. And what they found was that the participants that had the highest amounts of the cortisol and oxytocin were the ones that actually donated the money. So it's really interesting because it's nice to see kind of that science behind it. So that's the story with storytelling and emotions. And then Brian, you could hit the next button so we can go. We got that one, sorry. Okay, so this was, I think Michael had asked the question before about timing and engagement, and this is one of the facts that I wanted to share with you. So what we found are studies that have shown 70% of what we learn is forgotten within 24 hours of training, and 50% is forgotten within 1 hour. So that means it is about 12:45 right now on the East Coast. I would say probably by 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock this afternoon, you're going to remember maybe half of what Brian and I had said today. So, and it looks like we got a hand raised. Janet, I don't know if you had a question or if that was related to the Super Bowl question. Oh, I think it's gone. Okay. All right. That's right. Okay. Yeah. So you can hit the next button, Brian. Actually, you could hit all through all of these.
Okay.
There's 9 altogether. So the next one is 1 in 3 employees. Another fun fact here, 1 in 3 employees say that uninspiring content is a barrier to learning. I can certainly relate. I don't know about you, but I remember Schoolhouse Rock from grade school. I remember how a bill becomes a law. If I had read that in textbook, I assure you it would not have stayed with me all these years. So I'm a true testament to that. Next one is hook, right? So stories can hook your learners with the learning content, bring them into the story early. allow them to relate, and then help them to kind of get motivated to continue through the course. And we'll look at some examples of that in a little bit. Next, associated with storytelling is being relatable and relevant. So helping them, keep the dialogues realistic. Characters should be characters that they can see themselves in. They should be characters that they could see themselves learning, the skills throughout the course and that sort of thing. So keep it relatable and relevant. Quick thought about just the story structure. I think we're probably all familiar with it, but it kind of looks like the arc, right? You have the opening that sets the stage, you introduce your characters, you have some sort of an event that complicates matters, and then you have some sort of dramatic drama or suspense or something like that, and then you're kind of coming down to the other side, and which leads to the end of the story. So just a simple little arc there. Simplicity, when we're talking about stories and storytelling, we've all heard of keep it simple, silly, and same holds true, right? We don't want to overly complicate the stories in our e-learning. We don't want to lose the learner because they're trying to think that through. So just keep it simple. And then images, as Brian mentioned before, always a good idea to help tell that story. Tell the story with some of your images. As the old saying goes, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So really try to pull in those pictures that are going to bring attention to some of those key points and pull out some of those emotions. I think we can all relate to that's okay, you can go, Brian, but I think we could all relate to the SPCA commercials, like when they come on TV and you see the pictures of the dogs and the cats, and just, yeah, it's a mess after those. All right, so this is an example of the course that we talked about. So we are in the law library here. This is, and you're probably thinking at this point, well, yeah, this is great, all these great concepts, but what does it look like in practice? So this is what something like this could look like. So in this course, we have Julie. She's the coach in the law library, and she's the one that's kind of our guide that's helping us through the course. She's helping us learn the concepts and the details. And the main character, which would essentially in this case be the learner, they have to navigate through the content to learn the skills needed to kind of stay out of the compliance jail. So we have the judge on the right-hand side. You don't want to face the judge, right? So the idea there and the whole premise behind the course is that you want to stay out of compliance jail and you don't want to be facing the judge. So with that, I would love to see if any of you, and again, you can either unmute your line or drop it in chat, but curious if you have any ideas of, something that maybe some sort of scenarios or examples that might work really well with this kind of approach. I know I can drop in a few or just talk about a couple, but one thing that comes to mind for me is that something happens at work, right? And everyone perceives it a little bit differently. And then wouldn't it be cool to make a course where you're able to show the event from various viewpoints, right? So this would be a good way of teaching a soft skills course or something like that. Or maybe the character starts a new job and the story follows them through the first week or so, and they're making all these mistakes, they're getting confused, they're experiencing these challenges. And then the coach in that case could be a new coworker who helps them through and kind of gets them on the right path. So those are a couple ideas that come to mind for me. And if you have any, you can definitely drop it in just to share with others as well. Another one that I love, and again, really pulling on the emotions. How about one that you have a story where you open it up at a press conference, right? You're at a press conference and the CEO of a company is explaining why something happened. Could be good, could be bad. And then the course itself takes the place of a story in the sense of a flashback. So those are some ideas I have with that. Those are a couple just fun things that come to mind. Brian, I don't know if you have any others, or if anybody has some, you can feel free to just drop those in, and somebody else will be able to kind of share those.
There were a few dropped in the chat. Good background music under the voices, so not disrupting the the content, but to maybe hook them with the music, and Janet saying she likes when, story is woven. It starts out with one thing and
Yeah.
then, some learning, then a middle, then learning. So like a sandwich method.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect, Janet. I agree. And that kind of goes back to the question we had earlier, like how do we keep them motivated or interested? And, the story that Kimberly just, presented is a great way to do that, right? People will become curious. What's going to happen to this character, or what's going to happen to me if I'm the primary character? What's going to happen to me next? So with that compliance court, we made, the learner was the primary participant, and he or she needed to learn the material, and then they had to go in front of the judge and answer his questions. So that was, and if, you didn't get it correct, the judge became very angry, and there was a threat about being thrown into compliance jail. And we had a really kind of a cool animation for the people that went that way. And then, but if you, answered correctly and you did do well, you pleased the judge, and then you got, the rock star treatment, that, hey, you nailed it, you crushed it, great job, go out there and do the same thing in the workplace. So I know we're getting short on time. Thank you, Rosa. And I know we're only up to number 4. So I'm gonna go into a little bit of a faster approach here. But Kimberly and I will make sure to touch on the important points of our presentation. So storyboarding is number 4, right? And what I say about storyboarding is that, I found that some instructional designers do this all the time, and some instructional designers don't do it, only do it partial of the time. And my feeling on it is that it is an important step, especially when you are developing the course. Well, depending on when you're developing the course either by yourself, or if you're developing it with maybe you're handing it off to an e-learning developer. So I will just throw these on screen real quick for the sake of time. If you wanted to take a screenshot or capture anything. But the main point on this slide is that if you are designing and developing your own course, you're kind of that soup to nuts, I call it, instructional designer, you can go a little bit less on the storyboard because you know what you want the course to look like, and you can kind of build it out when you're working in your authoring tool. Now, if you're handing it off to an e-learning developer, it's a different situation, right? So Kimberly and I, at our previous company where we met, we worked in this latter role. So we were more the upfront designer, more the A and the D and ADDIE, and then we handed off to a team that did the development and the implementation. So in that case, what I recommend is using a tool like PowerPoint or something similar to it. And the focus is not just on the content, which of course is important, but also the design, how you want your course to be designed specifically. And that and I underline that in the next bullet point, you want to make sure you're specific, because that developer cannot read your mind. They don't know what you want or how it should look on screen if you don't give them a clear picture of that. So that's a benefit of that. Also, when you're working with SMEs, you can say, hey, this is what the course is going to look like. Let's make revisions here before we get into an authoring tool and start investing that time in development. So a couple of ideas to keep in mind with storyboarding. And here are some things that I'd recommend, when you are doing purposeful storyboard or course design. This is based on my experience. Every screen needs to be important, right? Don't have superfluous slides, and make sure every button, course navigation feature, and interactive element is purposeful. All right, that's a key point in designing really effective e-learning. You do not want to include any kind of animations, effects, imagery that don't add meaning to your instruction. I always say we are instructional designers. We're not instructional artists. Okay, what you may think is kind of cool or neat or incorporates your favorite pictures or colors, or that's not our focus. When you're a designer, I put on my designer hat and I keep my target audience in mind at all times. What's going to resonate with them, right? What's going to give meaning to them, not what's going to give meaning to me. And then getting back to Cami Bean, you know, she actually calls this clicky, clicky, bang, bang, which is, you know, e-learning with just a lot of whiz, lots of bang, really in a lame attempt to add pizzazz to dry content and make it more engaging. That's what we don't want to create in effective e-learning, right? And we've all seen that, unfortunately, and out there, but that's not what me and Kimberly are about. And that's what we strive not to do whenever we design courses. So, okay, so here's, you know, I'm probably dating myself a little bit here, but this is the KISS method. We got an eye roll from Janet there. So the KISS method, no, it's not the 70s hairband, but it is, you know, keeping it simple. We'll call it silly, you know, keep it PG, but that's really should be what's driving your design. I'm a big proponent of that, and everything that I've read, every, you know, workshop that I've gone to has really emphasized keeping it simple, right? You don't want to make it overly complicated and confusing. Make sure your learning experience is focused, okay? Less really is more, okay? You don't want to give them everything and the kitchen sink, okay? It's not that important. You really want to chunk content into short bite-sized sections that can be easily digested. Aim for one primary idea per slide. And just touching back on bullet point 2, really ensure that your learning objectives are in alignment with your overarching learning goal, and have that drive your content. That's going to determine what's important and what's not important. If content can be presented elsewhere at a later time in a different fashion, then do so. Okay, give that as an option to the learner. You don't need to include it in your e-learning course, and we're going to touch on that a little bit later. And real quickly, other best practices, I'll jump through these quickly. You want good contrast on screen. Light and dark, or dark and light, is the best contrast. You don't want to have two colors that are too similar, like we have here with the kind of the pink and the orange. You know, contrast is key. You don't want people squinting or trying to understand what's on your slide. It should be very clear and crisp. Content is king. Your information should be the primary focus of your slide. Okay, that is what the learner is reading, and that is what they're digesting. So make that the primary focus. Another best practice, guys, with storyboarding is limit yourself to one primary, maybe 1 or 2 secondary colors. Don't go over the entire color wheel. Design a really clean and precise design template. Make sure your imagery supports or better presents your training, not distracts. Don't add an image just because it looks cool or it might be, you know, might make an impact. Make sure it does make an impact, and that you're very selective. Sometimes I find selecting images is actually the most time-consuming part of e-learning. And be consistent. You know, imagery, buttons, navigation, etc. There should be consistency throughout the entire course. If the button is blue on slide 1, that button should be blue on slide 30. There should be no differentiation for your learner, because they're going to start to just, you know, draw connections as to what each thing does as they go through the training. So you want to make sure your consistency is a big thing. And lastly, I always say, just remember your high school English teacher. This is mostly about reviewing, right? Outline the storyboard. Do it first with a rough draft. Don't spend too much time on the details. Then go back and do a major cleaning up and fine tuning. I always say sleep on it one last time and revisit it. I always find a few things the next day after I've, you know, gone and reapproached the storyboard with a fresh set of eyes. And if you can, have somebody peer review. A second set of eyes is so valuable when you are storyboarding. And with that, I'll throw it back over to Kimberly for our next key fundamental.
Awesome, thank you. I know we are, looks like we're going to be going over a little on time. So if you're able to continue eating your lunch with us, that's great. We will, as Rosa mentioned, we will be recording this, so we'll be able to publish the
Yes.
the full session after if you do need to drop. So
yes, we'll get that out to everyone.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So fundamental number 5, and just so you know, the last few fundamentals are pretty quick anyway. So the majority of the time we spend in the beginning. So jump around, you might be wondering, okay, what does jumping around have to do with e-learning? And it's all about course navigation and a push versus pull. So we'll talk about those. Brian, you can go ahead and move it to the next slide. All righty. So course navigation, making sure we have consistent language throughout. Brian mentioned the colors of the buttons, but also, are you calling it next? Are you calling it forward? Make sure we're keeping that consistent, making sure we're keeping the location of the buttons consistent. Always want to have a navigation slide or some little mini video that explains to your learners how to navigate through the course. That's going to be very helpful in, especially if they're new to an organization, and also keeping them consistent, right? If you were going to be delivering 10, let's say, e-learning modules for your organization, you could record that once, and then you can just kind of reuse that and just plan to reuse the same overall course design. It would also be great to offer an opportunity to provide the learner a glimpse into their progress. So in the image that we have here, this is Julie, and she basically just gave some feedback. They had just completed one of their challenges, and they got a badge. So in the upper right-hand corner, like after each one that they had to, after each challenge, they got a badge that kind of dropped down from the top. So you see the one in the green in the upper right, and then the one in the orange. And then when they get to the third one, they get another badge as well. So definitely a great, way for them to kind of visualize. I've seen a lot of people do the little meter thing as well, like, kind of showing where they are in the course. Granted, you can have your where you are at different points in the course, like if you're using Storyline or something like that, because you can look at the menu and that sort of thing. But it's really kind of fun to add a little additional fun element, a type of badge, if you will. All right, Brian, you could go to the next page. All right, one of my favorite things to talk about, again, from an e-learning perspective, is the push versus pull concept. So what you see on the left is the standards that Brian and I were given about this particular topic with our compliance course. So it has, as you can see, it's just kind of written out in different paragraphs and that sort of thing. Well, instead of, and we know that the learners needed to learn this information, right? So it was very important. But rather than like put it in any particular order or have just text on the screen coming in to say, hey, here's the standards on 10-02 or whatever, we actually put them again into the law library, and then each book, I think there was like 12 of them, if I remember, or 10 standards, I can't remember off the top of my head. But we basically put a stack of books in the law library, and they were able to learn the information themselves. So they got to just click it however they wanted it. So they were pulling the information about each of those standards instead of us kind of pushing that information to them. So it was really cool. It was fun because they got to do it in a way that was, rather than it, kind of coming to them, they got to pick what order they wanted to complete it in. And that is, like I said, that's one of my favorite parts about e-learning, like one little simple thing that you can do that can really make a difference for the learner. And with that, Brian, I'm going to hand it back to you regarding support, how you support your peeps.
Thank you. And I would just piggyback off what you said, Kim. The law library was just a way that we knew there was a lot of information that the learner had to receive, right? And instead of creating, would have been probably 15 to 20 slides, right? We created one slide that had all clickable books, right? We made it like you went into a library, and here are so each of these, books here are actually slides or small topics of the training that we all put into one slide, right? And when you clicked on it, it kind of opened up on screen and you kind of saw the information. And what's nice about it is, it keeps your course design a lot smaller, right? It's all on one slide. But B, maybe the learner just wants to know about the learning objectives part, or maybe they want to know about, their review and publication. They have that ability to say, hey, I want to go learn that first, or pilot testing. That's where I'm having the trouble at work. Let me go click on that book. I know about the the course, the learning objective part, I can skip that or maybe, skim through that, but I want to focus on these other books. So that was kind of a cool element that I think really adds a lot when you're, in the push-pull in e-learning design, because you're putting the learner in control, right? If they're thinking about things like that, it's gonna give them, the power that they feel like, hey, I'm an autonomous adult learner, which is a good thing, right? Okay,
And,
so
Brian, there's a question that I think
yes,
will go towards both the last point and this one. And
yes.
so Michael is asking, while e-learning is important, is it important to make the slides printable if people want to use the information later on?
Yeah,
You want
in
to
our
take that one,
case,
Kim?
yes. Yeah, we did. We had it as a job aid. You're absolutely correct. And Brian actually talks about that a little bit in the support your peeps section, just kind of like where we could put those resources, how we could make them available. Not so much, we didn't actually have the slides as printable, but we had the content, the guide, essentially the NASBA standards guides. It's actually what we had used. I think we had done it as a PDF. But yep, great question. Michael, you were always just one step ahead of us.
Yep. Yeah, great question. Great question. And you're right. It's a great segue to supporting your peeps, as we call it here. So what we're talking about here is performance support tools, or PSTs. Some of you might be familiar with this. And this is a quote that a thought leader in our industry, Ethan Edwards, he works at Allen Interactions with Dr. Michael Allen. He said this at a workshop I attended, an ATD workshop, and this again just jumped off the page to me. And he said the purpose of e-learning can't be to create expertise, okay? Because expertise takes years to develop. It's a true statement. Instead, we should be aiming to create minimal competence, right? And this just tells me, you got to be realistic when you design e-learning, right? We may want to shoot for the moon and incorporate all the information for our learners, but in reality, how much of that are they actually going to retain when they leave your learning module, right? The reality is it's going to be very little. So that's where performance support tools come in, where if they need to know information that's important, or something that they need to memorize, put it in a PST where they can access it after your training, okay? And that's an effective way to use e-learning for training your adult learners. So you might be asking, what are they? So performance support tools are learning aids. They're meant to help employees with on-the-job support at the precise moment of need. So that's the kind of the key point, is that when they need it, that's when it's available to them. They are designed to support and guide employees while at work. Here are some characteristics to keep in mind. They're a great fit for informal, just-in-time learning, right? Again, think back to what we discussed previously about, people having problems, right? What Malcolm Knowles said, people want to get answers to their problems, right? And what do? What do they want? They want it right away, right? They want information. I want to Google it. I want to go to YouTube, get the information I need right away, right? So it's a great tool for just-in-time learning. Typically in our world, it's going to address a specific workplace challenge, right? Something that is challenging to our learner. The PST should be there to support them. It should be easily available and embedded directly into the learner's workflow if possible. That provides, task support. So something that, they don't need to go searching for, okay? That's not the goal of the PST. It supports formal training and improves that stickiness. I know Kimberly mentions that a lot, which is really the retention of learning, okay? And its eventual application on the job. So if you want someone to learn something and remember it, a PST might be a good thing to add to your training so that they do remember it. So it kind of sticks with them. And in summary, performance support tools flips the focus on being a solitary event to learning as a continuum. So that's a big thing. You can only do so much in a solitary event. That's something I'm a big proponent of. A lot of what we need to think of when we design training and learning in general is how can we make it into an event, right? Something that happens after the training. Okay. And Kimberly and I even have an activity for you all today that's going to, extend this after today's 1 hour lunch and learn. So we have here's a little nugget to kind of, I guess, think about in these closing minutes. But here are some examples. You might be saying, hey, Brian, well, what can I do to create a performance support tool? You can create a quick reference guide or a job aid, something that they can put on their desk or easily pull up on their laptop. Infographics are fantastic for this, right? Visuals and content together that tell a story. Infographics, I'm a huge fan. Micro learning, mobile learning, right? Can they pull something on their phone, right? Hey, I worked on a training about a year ago where we designed it specifically for mobile. And what was nice about it is that people could literally pull up anything on their mobile at any time. They got alerts through mobile. They can respond via mobile. I mean, literally, you can do the learning wherever you have your phone, which for all of us is pretty much everywhere, right? We take our phone everywhere. So that's kind of cool. Video tutorials, animated videos. Think about YouTube here. I'm a huge fan of YouTube. I need to know something. I need to learn how to change something on my lawnmower or fix something in my car. I'm going to YouTube. I want to see a video tutorial that's short, to the point, gives me what I need, and I'm moving on, right? And then micro learning. Can you create a small one learning objective micro learning module where the learner can take it in under 10 minutes and give them the information that they need? These are great examples of performance support tools. And then webcasts, podcasts. I'm sure all of us have our favorites that we listen to. Listen to it on the car, listen to it when you're running, listen to while your child's at soccer or dance practice, right? These are what these things are for. You can learn literally anywhere, and going back to our compliance course and to the question before, we created job aids for the learners, right? We said, hey, here are some learning objective tips, because we had to teach the technical managers in our organization how to effectively write learning objectives, right? We know that as learning professionals, they don't know that. So we created a job aid that said, hey, this is how you can do it in an effective way. And then we said, well, there's all these frequently asked questions about NASBA compliance, which we were teaching NASBA compliance in the course. Here are some FAQs that, read this, and see if this answers your question. Because you got to think, when you're e-learning, when you're in e-learning, it's an asynchronous event. Kimberly, myself, Rosa, we're not in the room with you. So we need to provide that information to them in some kind of resource, right? So that they have the information and don't need to go looking for it. So those are kind of the big things I want to stress upon. And I think I have one more slide here. Things that you can do to create good performance support tools is, during the design phase, think through and ask yourself, will this information be needed by the learner on their job, right? Those are great questions you want to be thinking about or asking while you're doing your analysis. If you're not sure, ask your SME, right? That's what they're there for. Use that expertise. I always ask them, do they need this on the job? Will they be using this in some way? That should put like a light bulb in your head saying, hey, this should be a great performance support tool or job aid or infographic. And then find out what types of tools or software your learners have access to. SharePoint is one that we're probably familiar with. And then utilize these to support your learners, right? What can you drop into a SharePoint and say, hey, after this training, go to the SharePoint site or this page and find these articles or these videos or these additional resources that you can read after today's training that will make this into a continuing learning event where you're learning more about this and learning it at your own pace. So that's the sixth fundamental. And without further ado, Kimberly, take us home with the seventh fundamental.
All right, seventh one, application and practice. This is obviously one of the most important steps. It's where we're taking our learners from the point where they were absorbing the information, if you will, and now they're applying it. So think about like the higher levels of blooms. This is also where all the good learning is going to go to stick. So this is the opportunity we want to provide for them, for the learners, to work in a safe environment where they can, where it's okay to fail, right? And so we're going to look just quickly. Brian, you could go to the next slide.
Sure.
I'm going to drop a link in here. This is, again, I know we have had so many shout outs to Dr. Michael Allen. If he's ears are ringing today, somebody can let him know it's because Brian and I are talking about him. But if you do nothing else, and one thing, if you do nothing else, consider using the CCAF model when you're designing your e-learning course. So we talked about the e-learning manifesto before. CCAF is kind of like ties in as well. Basically, CCAF is context, challenge, activity, and feedback. You're probably familiar with this, and some of you, if you've been to like some of the ICE sessions before. I know Dr. Allen's spoke about this a while back now, but I wanted to just drop that link into chat so that you can take a look and just kind of see that a little bit. But context is just, helping the learners to understand the context, how it relates to their job. Challenges, right? You put them in some sort of situation. So that kind of goes back to storytelling, something that's going to really provide that intrinsic motivation to proceed through the course, some sort of sense of urgency or something like that. A, for activities, you always want to give them the opportunity for practice and to practice out those activities. And then F is for feedback. So after they take it, whatever the journey is that you put them on in your story, they're going to want to give it some time to actually give some feedback around that. Not just whether they're correct or incorrect, but go into a little bit more detail about why and how they can do things differently in the future for that. All right, you could take them to the next slide, and just a quick little glimpse here, if y'all can see it. It's from our compliance course again. And this was an example of when there was an activity that we provided feedback. So in this scenario, the learner gets this email, right? They get set up with this activity where there's an email that comes in from their coworker, Jan. Jan's got some questions about the NASBA compliant learning objectives. So she gets this email. In the first screen, you can kind of see where that scenario is set up. And then you have the visual of the actual email inbox of what that looked like. And there's a text entry box in there. So basically the learner is going to reply back to the email and they're going to kind of type in their responses into the text entry box. And then the learner is going to get feedback from the compliance coach. So based on whatever input they put into the text entry box, the compliance message on the right might be different. So that's a perfect example of how we applied that CCAF model in this particular e-learning course. So check out, like I said, encourage you to check out the CCAF model if you're not familiar with it. With that was our 7 principles and fundamentals. We do have a bonus round, which is reflection. And I think it's important that we think about from a reflection perspective at the end of our bigger programs and maybe on some of our e-learning courses to drive home some of those concepts. Maybe you're jotting it down, maybe you're taking just a couple minutes at the end. But we actually have a little activity here for you and an opportunity to win a e-gift card of your choice. So in the spirit of sharing knowledge and taking advantage of the social media that we have, would love everyone to take a moment, either, some point later today, and just post out on the social media of your choice a quick little response around what you got from this learning program today, what you got from maybe if there was one fundamental that particularly resonated with you or one that you felt like you can implement right away. And would love it if you can tag Brian and I and hashtag ATDCFL in your post. And if you do that, we're looking for the person with the most likes on their post by 8 a.m. tomorrow, and they will receive a $25 e-gift card of your choice. So again, it could just be one of the fundamentals that really stuck out to you or one that you thought you could implement right away. Tag us all and see how many likes you can get on your post by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning Eastern time. And you might have a $25 e-gift card of your choice coming your way.
And Kim, I think we discussed you were going to handle that gift card, right? That was coming out of your pocket.
That is coming out of my pocket. That's right.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that's a
Now,
nice surprise. We did not know you were going to do that. So that's a really nice surprise.
Absolutely.
for the members that are here today. And hopefully the ones that listen to this later, now the pressure is definitely on
Yes.
to send them the link to the recording. So in the chat, I am putting your profiles for LinkedIn so they can tag you in this, as well as our chapter hashtag. So challenge is on, everyone. Now, there was a final question I saw, and if you have any other questions, please put them in there now. So Elizabeth had a question of how did you allow for those multiple variations of what learners could enter in that text thing?
Oh,
It's
great,
like
great.
It's freestyle texting, right?
It is. That is a fantastic question, Elizabeth. Yep. What we ended up doing was the feedback that Julie, the coach, gave on that was that she would say, she basically said things like, you may have noted blah, 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 or you may have responded blah, blah, blah. So there was a little bit of a, there was like kind of two directions that it could have gone in, but both of them were able to give the feedback where it wasn't like super specific. Because you're right, I wish we had that capability where it can read verbatim essentially, but it basically said something like, the correct one was, thanks for sending her feedback or something along those lines. And it was, you probably noted that the first learning objective was not, NASBA compliant or something like that. So it was vague enough that it was not specific to anything that they might have typed in, but it was specific enough that the learner might have recognized that it was actually part of that, kind of that process. Now, I guess where the tricky part would have come in is if somebody just responded no, for example, and then the Julie response would have come up and said, you may have noted. So it gets a little tricky there, but that was what we did. And I know we had thought about that for a little while because we really wanted the opportunity to give them a chance to respond in a different way than just, doing a multiple choice type of question for feedback. Yeah. But we definitely had that limitation with how do you word it? So we just had to word it in such a way that it was saying that it would have covered no matter what they had said for the most part. I mean, unless they replied nothing, or something
right
like
lots
that.
Of variables.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
True.
All right.
True.
Any other questions before we wrap this up?
Well, again, we just want to say thank you.
A lot of thank you messages here
for all the time.
Yeah.
And thank you for those of you that hung out with us just a little bit longer. We appreciate that and appreciate your interacting with the presenters and making this, more engaging for everyone. So Brian, Kimberly, thank you so much for helping us kick off 2022. I am looking forward to seeing you when you come down here to ATD ICE this year and connecting with you personally. And for those who attended, don't forget to share and tag Brian and Kimberly. And then when whoever wins, share again. Let us know, that you won and tell us, what you liked about this. So thank you. You guys applied every one of the principles that you shared in your presentation for effective e-learning actually in this webinar. So thank you for showing us, how to conduct effective webinars while learning how to create effective e-learning. I truly appreciate your time and what you shared with us today and hope we can do this again soon.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We truly appreciate it. And thank you so much, Rosa, for all of your help and guidance and getting us set up with it.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye all.